Mr. Bissett, gospodine Vidojeviću, dear guests, dobroveče. Teško je zamisliti svet bez neizmenične struje, motora, radija, daljinskog upravljača ili interneta. Danas ćemo da govorimo o čoveku koji je bukvalno osvetlio planetu i pronašao budućnost pre nego što je ona stigla.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome. We are gathered here to explore the mind of a man who didn't just invent for his time, but for the future. A man who once said, "The present is theirs, the future, for which I have really worked, is mine." Thank you for joining us today to celebrate the genius of Nikola Tesla.
U autobiografiji Nikole Tesle, My Inventions, The Autobiography of Nikola Tesla, koja je sastavljena od nekoliko članaka koje je Nikola Tesla objavljivao u magazinu Electrical Experimental Magazine u 1919. godini, Nikola Tesla sebe opisuje kao vizionarskog pronalazača.
Tesla described himself as a hard worker who devoted all of his waking hours to thought. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to invite Bran Selic to take us on a journey through the life and inventions of Nikola Tesla.
Oh, thank you. By the way, for the people in the first row, I ask questions. Okay, so be ready. Make sure you don't make any mistakes. Yes, I'm supposed to be speaking into this. Okay. Okay, so it's a short presentation, basically to give you a sense of the scope of the man, his characteristics and so on, and of course you can't cover that in just 15 minutes or less, but we'll see. So he was a man who basically lived outside his hometown, and he made most of his great accomplishments outside his country, outside of his domain. On the other hand, as Margaret Cheney, who wrote one of the earliest books on Tesla, said, he was also a man out of time. In other words, as was just mentioned, he's someone who basically forecasts the future and in fact made the future possible as we see it now. So let me start with this. I'm an engineer by training, and I did study Tesla, of course, at the university where I did my education, my student days. In fact, there was one professor who actually, as a young man, worked with Tesla. Unfortunately, he didn't teach me anything. I didn't take one of his courses, but we learned a lot from him. But this is a thing that really, what I'm trying to capture here is this notion of what makes this person unique? What makes him the scientist, the inventor that he is? And there's a beautiful quote from one of his people who were born in the same area at the same time as he was, contemporaries, Louis Henry Sullivan, who basically made this quote. This is just the first part of the quote. "The world is filled with knowledge. It is almost empty of understanding. For let me tell you, knowledge is of the head." In other words, that's the rational part. Understanding is of the heart. And I think Tesla typified this very nicely. He combined these two things. He wasn't just a scientist who worked with mathematical models and things like that. He actually understood electromagnetics, for example. He had a deep understanding of that. So what's the difference between knowledge and understanding? Well, let's take this example of this young lady, probably 7, 8-year-old kid there. Look at that, she's freely riding this bicycle, going through through a puddle, took her feet off the pedals just so that she could not get her feet wet without thinking about it. On the other hand, this is a description of the physics behind riding a bicycle. These are Newton's 3 laws. And of course, you can read through that. Don't. The whole point is that it's a lot of text. But no matter how often, you could actually memorize this and declamate it whenever you like. But it won't help you ride the bike. Because you know it, but you don't understand it. Whereas this young lady understands it. Maybe she doesn't know the laws of physics, probably doesn't, but she understands it. And that's the difference between these two things, right? What Tesla did was he combined these two things. In other words, to him, electricity, electromagnetism, all of these things were essentially something that he understood and he felt internally, so to speak. So who was he? Well, he's got, like everybody else, but this is an exceptional man. He had many facets, right? So obviously he was an inventor. We all know that. That's what he's known for. But he was also a scientist, if you like. That to a great extent, it has to do with the understanding part. He was a visionary. Again, the introduction mentioned that. And he was an idealist. So I'm going to go through these very briefly, just to give you some substance behind the claim that these are some of the primary characteristics, certainly not all of them, of the man. So, as Aristotle said, if you want to know something and understand it, you have to know where it began and how it began. Okay, so we're going to start there because I think that had a lot of influence on Tesla. So this is a map of the Austro-Hungarian Empire around mid-19th century. And let's see if I can get the pointer working. The colored part is Austria-Hungary, the Habsburg Empire. And down here you can see sort of penetrating into it. This is Bosnia over here. It says Turkey. And that was the borderland, of course, between the West and the East. Now, what the Habsburg Empire people did was in order to protect that border, they imported, if you like, people, the warriors, the people from that area, from the Turkish part, who were, of course, opposed to the Turks and the Ottoman Empire, and populated it. And one of those border areas is Lika. Okay. And in there, in 1856, so these were essentially tough border people who actually were warriors and could live through difficult times. And in this village of Smiljan in Lika, in July 9th or 10th, somewhere in there, in 1856, that's where Tesla was born. Now, on the left here, whoops, sorry. I have to get used to the... On the left here, you see that house, that's slightly reconstructed family home, and next to it is the church where Tesla's father, Milutin, was the pastor. His mom, Juka Tesla. Now let's look at the influence that these two people had on Tesla, right? His father was a very erudite man. He had a large library. He spoke, I think, 4 or 5 languages, including the classical Greek and Latin. In fact, there was an anecdote saying that if they ever lose these classics, they should just come to him and he can basically recite them from memory. He had a prodigious memory, just like Tesla, so that sounds like a good gene to have. Oops. These buttons are very small, and he spoke several languages, and of course that is something that was transferred to Tesla, the child, right? On the other hand, on the mother's side, Juka was a homemaker, but she was quite prodigious in her own way. She was part of a family of inventors. They came up with all kinds of inventions for various household contraptions and so on. She was a truly great woman of rare skill, courage, and fortitude. So let's look at the inventor part. And what you see on this side here is part of the patent that Tesla produced for his alternating motor. And he said, well, it was only after a while that I realized that my passion and my calling is that of an inventor. That's from the book, My Inventions, that Boba mentioned in the introduction. So just to give you an example, it's a well-known example because it tells you the value of having a broad perspective. It isn't just a technical perspective, but also social, artists, and so on. So Tesla was walking with a friend through a park in Budapest, and he was recalling this part of from the Goethe's Faust, right? It talks about the sun going around and so on and so on. And that inspired Tesla. That's where the invention of the AC motor, the one that we have in all the Tesla cars, by the way, and all the other cars that are electric and so on, that's Tesla's motion. So that basically that thing inspired him. This particular, the knowledge of that poem and the ability to project that into a problem that he was struggling with is something that is unique. And we have more of that because it really is a singular mind. Now here's some examples of that. This is the way I'm an engineer, and I've been an engineer over 50 years now. This is not how most engineers, even the most, if you like, the most talented ones work. This man was exceptional. He said, I basically invented this whole thing in my head, but not just the principle and the high-level stuff. He actually went down to the level of individual screws and the construction and so on, right? So he basically conceived this whole thing, experimented with it in his own head. That is amazing, because he said, oh yeah, and I could even detect where things would go wrong, and he would fix it. And all of that was in his head. And then when he finally actually implemented it, it worked exactly as I planned it. And this is something, now he didn't realize that this was really a unique skill, but he said, a lot of other inventors, basically, he thought they lacked the willingness. I think they lacked the talent. That's the issue. Tesla had a unique talent in here. So, for example, they take Edison. And by the way, that story about the current wars is a little exaggerated. The enmity between Tesla and Edison wasn't that bad. In fact, at one point later on, much later, Edison actually provided a personal recommendation for Tesla. So don't get carried away about these so-called current wars. Anyways, but this is how Edison, so he was an inventor, a sort of a brute force way, which basically says if I have to look for a needle in a haystack, I'm going to go through every little straw until I find what I need. And that's, for example, I think he did over 1,000 different materials before he came up with the light bulb. And he thought a little theory and calculation would have saved him 90% of his effort. But this was, again, the uniqueness of this man. And so he had over 200 patents, close to 200 in the States alone, right? And here's a couple of testimonials from his history of science. Both of these testimonials come from historians of science. So basically, it's what we know, Reginald Cap. Nothing but a magnetic field, so there were no brushes and things like that. DC motors require brushes which wear out and so on. So that was one of the things that, by the way, Edison asked Tesla to fix, and he came up with this motor. And this one is quite impressive too. It's the greatest inventor that ever lived. What about the scientist side? And here you can see some of his vision and some of his, if you like, selflessness. Or he basically said, I'm working for the future. It's the foundation. Now, to lay the foundation means putting up a scientific basis for some inventions. So it's a combination of deep theoretical but also intuitive understanding. Theoretical knowledge and intuitive understanding of the underlying physics, in particular of electromagnetism. There's that quote. Let me tell you, knowledge is of the head, understanding is of the heart. And I think it's this understanding of the physics behind it that makes him so unique. And he bemoans, and I can tell you because I'm a scientist of the 20th and now 21st century, that science has turned into a mathematical modeling exercise, but the understanding is gone. There's a beautiful quote from Feynman, Nobel. He says, if you think you understand quantum mechanics, then you don't understand quantum mechanics because it's not something that's easily comprehensible to our traditional way of thinking. So he's decrying this approach to science now, which is current now, which is primarily based on formalism, and mathematics is just an approximation of reality, and reality is much more complicated. So here's a whole bunch of contributions, and this is just a short list. There's a lot more of them. And some, renewable energy is something we recognize now, but he recognized it in the 20s as being a big issue. And look at this one down below here, the X-ray. He didn't invent X-rays. That was invented by a gentleman called Wilhelm Röntgen, a German scientist. But he was the first one who decided to make photos of this. And here's what Röntgen wrote to him. If only I knew how to make such things. It's a thanking. The inventor is thanking Tesla for how his work was expanded. Now, what about being a visionary? Well, that picture up on top shows the famous Wycliffe Tower. There was one of these made in New Jersey, which unfortunately was eventually removed. But the idea behind it was he sold it to, I think it was more J.P. Morgan as a communication device. And it was that. But it was actually much more than that. It was actually a general energy transmission system. Wireless way of, you have that now when you put, for example, your phone next to, say, a filling device without a wire. That uses that principle that Tesla came up with. And again, he did it for humanity. And here's something you folks will recognize. When wireless is perfectly applied, we shall be able to communicate with one another instantly, irrespective of distance. We can see each other through television and telephony and so on from distances of thousands of miles. And look at that last quote. Instruments will be so sophisticated and so simple that you'll be able to carry one in your pocket, essentially. This is 1926. And the idealist. This is one of his poems. It's a part of one of his poems. One child in misery is a nation's shame. I think that applies quite nicely, by the way, to the way things are headed in some Western countries, particularly these days with the big, beautiful bill that Trump is dealing with. He's doing it for the benefit of mankind. I have placed all as the real values in my life what follows when I'm dead. No desire for material advantage. In fact, the last 20, 25 years of his life, he lived as a pauper. Even though he had all these patents, but he wasn't interested in the material things. The only thing that counts is the good that my work might bring to humanity. And there's this famous, I'm sure a lot of you heard the story that when he died, in his hotel room, and the FBI came in and took a lot of his documents and so on, and a lot of them had to do with this device here, which, but here's how he viewed it. I hope this invention will make war impossible because it's so powerful. It will tend to bring about and maintain permanent peace among nations. Now, we know that technology actually works the other way around. I must admit, I'm a technical guy, and I'm ashamed of some of the devices that I see people who are in my discipline are producing. But this is a naivete, if you say, of almost a child, but his idealistic view that we can actually make technology that will prevent war. So in conclusion, this is something that he said. Again, it's his humanitarian view and on the behalf of whole humanity. And by the way, as you can see here, in that last line, it's a deed of a Serb. I come from a very wiry and long-lived race. Tesla. Thank you.
Nikola Tesla je posmatrao svet kroz prizmu harmonije i lepote, često praveći paralelu između naučnih otkrića, umetnosti i ljudskog duha. Gospodin Bojan Z. Bosiljcic, autor 9 knjiga o umetnosti kroz prizmu filma i socijalnih previranja, posvetio je svoju poemu Gospodar Munja Nikoli Tesli.
Now we'd like to welcome to the stage Bojan Z. Bosiljcic, who will recite his poem, The Lord of Lightning, a tribute to Nikola Tesla. The poem's translation will be on the screen for anybody who doesn't understand Serbian. So please, a round of applause for Bojan Z. Bosiljcic.
Dobro večer. Good evening. Bonsoir, mesdames et messieurs. Ce poème est écrit le style épique classique serbe en 20 rimes. A song of a poet, a dreamer so grand, of Nikola Tesla, pride of our land. From a newfound poet, a dreamer like he, who leaves his own mark for the future to see. This is the closest English equivalent to the folk rhyming style in Serbian epic rhymes used in my poem. So here is Gospodar Munja, Lord of Lightning, or more poetic translation, Master of Thunderbolts. In French, of course, Le Maître de la Foudre. Gospodar Munja, Nikola Tesla je naša dika, iznjedrila ga je gorda lika. Rođen je 1856. godine u olujnoj noći kao predskazanje za sve što će poslije doći. Grobovi su praskali i munje sjevale nebom. Bio je to Božji pozdrav djetetu volšebnom. Rođen je na Vidovdan, a preminuo na Božić. On je bio od svevišnjeg izabrani srpski mladić. Teslin magični broj postao je 3, kao ključ da se misterija univerzuma otvori. Na putu od rodnog Smiljana do Njujorka ostavio je traga dok je svijeta i vijeka. Čovjek je rođen da radi, trpi i da se bori. Tako je o životu Tesla znao da govori. Živio je dugih 86 godina i postao čovjek za sva vremena. Kao najčuveniji Srbin u svijetu, njegovo ime je obišlo cijelu planetu. Po Tesli je nazvana mjerna jedinica u fizici u počast za njegova dostignuća u nauci. Teslino ime se nalazi na automobilima, fakultetima, bibliotekama i aerodromima. Bio je visok 2 metra, bitak i impozantan, magnet za oči i elegantan. Srbin, Amerikanac, kosmopolita i vanzemaljac, mistični Tesla je izazivao divljenje i tajac. Predano imun na ženske čari, on je za nauku jedino volio da mari. Za svoju viziju je bio vjenčan kojoj je ostao neraskidivo vjeran. Imao je fotografsko pamćenje, čime je proširivao znanje i prosvjetljenje. Spavao je dnevno samo 2 sata, nije gubio vrijeme da dođe do rezultata. Tesla je izumio budućnost i čovečanstvu podario svjetlost. Mislio je daleko ispred svog doba, zato je ostao neshvaćena osoba. Bio je pronalazač, fizičar i inženjer koji je sa preko 300 patenata svijetu pokazao novi smjer. Donio je ljudima struju i udario temelje za modernu civilizaciju. Ljudsku fantaziju je pretvorio u stvarnost i svojim izumima je stvorio novu realnost. Bio je poliglota, vrlo duhovit i humanista, kojem je savjest uvijek bila čista. Čovjekoljubac, a ne srebroljubac, on je bio poeta nauke, pisac i genijalac. Nije žudio za novcem i slavom, već samo da izumljuje svojom glavom. Uložio je sebe služeći čovječanstvu i završio siromašan u samoizgnanstvu. Za sve njegove uzume i naučne pobjede za uzvrat je dobio poniženja i uvrede. Ne žalim što su drugi pokrali ideje moje, ali žalim što nemaju svoje. Sadašnjost je njihova, ali je budućnost moja. Ovim riječima je Tesla našao sebi spokoja. Čudljivi samotnjak koji je volio golubove, Tesla je slijedio svoje snove. Njegov globalni doprinos nosi epsku dimenziju, a njegov ekscentrični lik izaziva kontroverziju. Bio je briljantni vizionar i revolucionar, moderni prometej i vječiti sanjar. Gospodar munja i ukrotitelj vodopada, Tesla među najveće svjetske umove spada. Bez njega ne bi bilo ni interneta, ni bežične telefonije, niti sve ove elektronske tehnologije. Kuda bi ova civilizacija išla i dospjela da nije bilo Teslinih epohalnih dijela? 28. juni 2025. godine. Hvala puno. Svojski sam se trudio, ali još ne umijem da vas pozdravim sve na moj tradicionalni sarajevski primosovski način. Hvala mi još jednom i I don't know how to do it any worse.
It was amazing. One more time for Bojan Z. Bosiljcic. Nikola Tesla's words emphasize the power of imagination and the fundamental nature of energy. Describing the thoughts of Nikola Tesla requires understanding a mind that operated more like an advanced simulation engine than a traditional inventor's brain. With her storytelling skills, Bojana Zizic, accompanied by Irvin Marucelj on, I think he forgot his Tesla coils at home, so he's going to use the piano. They introduce us to a world of thought and meditation of Nikola Tesla. So please welcome to the stage Bojana Zizic and Irvin Marucelj.
In my youth, kneeling on my knees before bedtime, I prayed to God. I prayed that way until I turned 50. I've been praying a bit differently, but the essence is the same. I pray to God every day. The gift of mental power comes from God, the divine. And if we concentrate our mind on that truth, we become in tune with its great power. My mother had taught me to seek the truth in the Bible. I learned a dozen languages, studied literature and arts, spent my best years in libraries reading everything that came my way. And though I sometimes felt I was wasting time, I quickly realized it was the best thing I ever did. review the events of my life, I realize how subtle the influences that shape our destinies are. In the universe, there is a core from which we obtain knowledge, strength, and inspiration. My brain is only a receiver. My inventions are the product of my emotions and my intuition. They are born from my heart. To live the life you want, you have to be true to yourself. Every effort under compulsion is a sacrifice of life energy. I never paid such a price. On the contrary, I always thrived on my thoughts. I am credited with being one of the hardest workers, and perhaps I am, if thought is the equivalent of labor, because I have devoted almost all my waking hours to thinking. But if work is interpreted to be a structured performance within a specific time frame according to rigid rules, then I may be the worst of idlers. Everyone should have a little chaos in their lives to make it interesting. You can find very few great inventions made by a married man. Be alone. That is the secret of invention. Be alone. That is when ideas are born. With ideas, it is like with steep mountains you climb. At first, they make you dizzy and anxious to get down. You feel distrustful of your own power, but soon the enchanting influence of the altitude calms you down, and you begin to crave those heights. There is no greater thrill than the one felt by the inventor when he sees his creation unfolding to success. Such a thrill makes a man forget food, sleep, friends, love, everything. We must all have an ideal to govern our behavior. It could be religion, art, science, but what matters is that it is a non-material force. Our virtues and shortcomings are inseparable, like force and matter. When they separate, man is no more. It's not the love you make, it's the love you give. We're all alone, only egos, beliefs, and fears separate us. If your hate could be turned into electricity, it would light up the entire world. Most people are so absorbed in the contemplation of the outside world that they are oblivious to what is happening within. My belief is firm in the law of compensation. The true rewards are always in proportion of the sacrifices made. It is paradoxical yet true that the more we know, the more we realize how ignorant we are. For it is only through enlightenment that we realize our limitation. One of the most gratifying results of intellectual evolution is the continuous opening of the new horizons. What we want is a closer contact and better understanding between individuals and communities all over the world, and the elimination of egoism and pride, which are always prone to plunge the world into barbarism and strife. Peace can only come as a natural consequence of universal enlightenment. The growth of civilization is like a fire. First, a feeble spark, then a flickering flame, and then a mighty blaze that constantly increases in speed and power. If you only knew how much you're capable of, you would realize that limitations are merely illusions. Our destiny is not written for us, but by us.
Bravo.
Thank you so much, Bojan and Irv. Let's hear it one more time. One more round of applause. That was transformative. And it's actually given me a great idea. Next time my wife says I'm lazy for not taking out the trash or doing what I'm supposed to right away, I'll say, sweetheart, I've devoted hours of my day to thought. I'm actually the hardest worker there is because I've been thinking for many hours today. So thank you for that inspiration as well. In an 1899 interview, Tesla spoke of a cosmic symphony of electrical vibration that filled his senses. Now, Tesla's senses are a little bit different than ours. When we think of senses, we think of 5 senses. Tesla said there was 6 senses: seeing, hearing, feeling, smelling, touching, and thinking. He famously noted, "Everything is light, I am part of the light, and it is music." Music was a private sanctuary for Tesla, who played the piano and the violin and spoke of it as a source of energy. Now, I'm comparing Irv to Tesla here, because he just played the piano. I'm sure he can play the Tesla coils, who knows? But he's going to be playing the accordion shortly. And although Tesla lived in the United States, far from his birthplace in Lika, for most of his adult life, Tesla maintained a deep affection for his Serbian heritage, including its music and culture. Tamo Daleko, a famous song that all the Serbs here know, it's called There Far Away. It's a famous Serbian folk song from the First World War. The song symbolizes a longing for home. There Far Away was Nikola Tesla's favorite song. So we're going to welcome to the stage Daniella Jovanovic, and we're going to welcome back our dear friend Irvin Marucelj to play this song. Is Daniella here?
Yes.
And you have a, oh, sorry.
Yes.
There we go. So please, welcome to the stage Daniella Jovanovic and Irvin Marucelj.
Tamo je selo moje, tamo je Srbija. Tamo je selo moje, tamo je Srbija. Tamo daleko gde cveta limuču, tamo je srpskoj vojsci jedini bio put. Tamo je srpskoj vojsci jedini bio put. Ozar je morala doć, ta tužna nesrećna noć, kada si, Dragane moj, otišao u krvav boj. Ojade morala doć, ta tužna nesrećna noć, kada si, Dragane moj, otišao u krvav boj. Tamo daleko gde cveta beli krin, tamo su živote dali otac i njoj sin. Tamo su živote dali zajedno otac i sin. Tamo gde Timo pozdravlja Veljkov grad, tamo mi spališe crkvu i mojoj venča se ja. Tamo mi spališe crkvu u kojoj venčah se ja. Ozar je morala doć, ta tužna nesrećna noć, kada si, Dragane moj, otišao u krvav boj. Ozar je morala doć, ta tužna nesrećna noć, kada si, Dragane moj, otišao u krvav boj. Tamo gde tiha putuje Morava, tamo mi ikona osta i moja krsna slava. Tamo mi ikona osta i moja krsna slava. Bez otadžbine daleko na Krfu živeh ja, ali sam ponosno klicao, živela Srbija. Bez otadžbine daleko na Krfu živeh ja, ali sam ponosno klicao, živela Srbija.
Wow, that was powerful. I'm glad nobody has to follow that. One more time for Daniella and Irv, please. Incredible, incredible. Thank you so much, Daniella and Irv. Ladies and gentlemen, as we move forward from here today, let us embrace Nikola Tesla's vision to look beyond the immediate and pioneer for a brighter, more unified future.
I na kraju, dozvolite mi da se zahvalim upravi crkvenoškolske opštine Sveti Stefan, članovima udruženja penzionera ZIDD iz Ottave i svima vama koji ste došli.
And I want to give special thank you to Nusreta, who made some incredible collages, some seats. Thank you. To our Italian magician friend of Serbia who manned the presentation, Luca Furgiuele. And of course, a big round of applause to the person that brought us here today. Thank you for organizing this 170th celebration of Nikola Tesla, Boba Borojevic. Okay, she doesn't deserve that much praise. I'm just joking. Thank you so much, Boba. So now I invite everyone, there is an exhibition in the back highlighting Nikola Tesla's inventions. Thank you. And the posters. There was wonderful posters that we see all around us. They were created by Dusan Ivancevic and Rasa. Thank you so much for coming. So please help yourself to some refreshments. Thank you again for coming and enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you.